Okay, this is Suzanne Denitz from Georgia State University, and we're doing a Religious Lives interview on February 14th, 2011. 13th. Did I say 14th?
Right.
February 13th, 2011. And I am here with...
Betty Mukja Hassan Amin.
Okay. And we are at her home in Decatur, Georgia. Okay.
Stone Mountain, actually.
Oh, Stone Mountain, Georgia. Two mistakes so far. Okay. Okay. The first thing is, what are your earliest memories concerning religion? And if you can recall actually a specific moment or event, that would be great.
Okay. About my early religious experiences, I remember very vividly growing up in a Christian household. My mother was Baptist. My father was Methodist. And my grandmother, or my paternal grandmother, was mother of the church, the Methodist church to which my father belonged. My mom, as I said, belonged to a Baptist church, and that church was closest to where we lived. And so every Sunday I went to Sunday school. Now my mom had 10 children, 3 of whom had passed away. So she stayed home and was really your typical housewife and homemaker during those early days. But I remember specifically going to Sunday school and loving Sunday school. And I remember the holidays, particularly around Easter and Christmas, when those days meant so much, to us. And especially all of the nice clothing that we got and new things to wear, to church for those specific special occasions, those specific holidays, and my participating in some of the plays and programs and activities that was sponsored by the church. One of the things that I definitely remember and I recall to so many people, because right now I write poetry and I write children's stories. And I've done a book about my Hajj to Mecca, and I've done another book called Insights. I'm saying that because with regard to my earliest religious upbringing, I can remember the first book that my mother ever bought for me before I started school. And that was a book it was a children's Bible book, and it was called Joseph and His Coat of Many Colors. And I remember that my mother bought either my brother or my sister a similar book. I think it was a set of 3 religious storybooks for children. And one of them was, another book, was the book about Rebecca. And I remember that so very vividly. And as a matter of fact, not very, very long ago, I gave my son a special Quran that I presented particularly, to him. And I wrote in that, in the note that I wanted to include in the book, that the first book my mother gave to me was the book about Joseph and his coat of many colors. So right from the very beginning, not only was my mother helping me to learn to read, but she was instilling in me religious principles, and a love for God and God consciousness right from the very beginning. And of course, when I was young, I didn't realize that it was just a pretty book with a lot of colors and a lot of beautiful pictures in it, so forth and so on. But it began to have meaning for me as I grew up. I said, oh, my mother was a wise woman. She didn't just give me any old book to read as a beginning reader for me, but she gave me a book about God, one of God's prophets, to read in my early life. And I never forgot that.
Oh, wow. That's so sweet. So you said you went to a Baptist church?
Yes.
And did your whole family go to church every Sunday?
Yes, for the most part. Now, in growing up, when I was young, remember I told you, my mom had 10 children, and I'm the youngest of 10. So my older siblings were much older than me, and they had left home and moved to some of the northern cities, and I was still at home with another sibling, my brother next to me, who's 4 years older than me, and a niece who she's actually my niece, but we grew up as sisters because her mother died when she was 3 months old. So I didn't know anything other than that. I thought she was my sister. But the 3 of us grew up in a household. And all 3 of us, yes, we attended Sunday school, we attended church services, we attended programs that was held in the church. And one other thing I forgot to mention was summers. I talked about holidays, but back during the time when we were growing up, there in the summer there was always vacation Bible school, and it was not just 4 days or 5 days long like I see churches have that have vacation Bible school now. But then it was about a good 6 to 8 weeks, almost the entire summer. And I so thoroughly enjoyed it. I would get up every morning to make sure that I went to Vacation Bible School, where we learned more about how God wanted us to be as human beings, even as children, singing the songs like Jesus loved me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. And letting my little light shine and things of that nature. So I remember that very well, and getting along with other children in the neighborhood whose parents also sent them to Vacation Bible School, how we walked together and we were in those classes, those rooms together, and just learning to get along with one another as good Christian people. That was important to me. I'll never forget, my religious upbringing. I won't forget that,
So this was in Durham, North Carolina, and what year was it? Like, what year were you born?
I was born in 1948, and I'm sure around 1954, when I was perhaps in about the first grade, I can remember very early going to Sunday school and going to and attending church. Now, my mother didn't go that regularly because she had some health problems. And I could see that oftentimes her health would prevent her from going. She had several hospitalizations, as a matter of fact, when I was growing up. But one of the things that I tell even my children right now, as an adult, we are encouraged to read the Quran every day. But it's not strange to me to have to read the Quran every day, because even though my mother had her health issues and her health challenges, I saw her read her Bible every day. That has stuck with me to now, because I didn't know I was going to fall in her footsteps. And I am. I'm following in her footsteps, because I generally, if most days out of the week, I read the Quran, during the week, during the day. And I saw that example set by my mother. As a matter of fact, in the Bible, she would read certain verses, and the verses that pertain to each of her children, she would write our names over it.
Oh, wow.
She would. And so even like now when I read the Quran, the verse, the message that's in it, sometimes I see how that message pertained to my children. Now, I don't write their names over it like my mother did, because I didn't want to really write in the Quran that way. But sometimes I feel an inclination to write in it so that I'll know exactly where it is. But I might fold the page back so that I can remember to share something with my children that I read in the Quran. So,
do you remember any specific verse that she had your name over?
Well, I don't remember a specific verse, but I don't know why. What stands out to me is it's the verse, and I don't remember it, but it was the one about Ecclesiastes, and that's the one that talks about it's a time to sow and a time to reap and a time to do different. It's about the times in Ecclesiastes, and that has always stuck with me. Now, another aspect of my religious upbringing was definitely school. Because during that time, prayer had not been taken out of school. So every morning when we went to school, and there's one teacher in particular, my fifth grade teacher, her name was Miss Annie Dunnigan. I will never forget her. We would come to school every morning, and we would recite the Lord's Prayer. Then each student had to have learned a Bible verse. So we would have to recite a verse out of the Bible. And then we would sing a devotional hymn, and then and we got inspected for cleanliness, and then our school day would begin. It did not begin just on academics.
Wow.
It began first with giving praise to God.
And this was a public school.
This was public school in Durham, North Carolina.
And were these schools, I'm curious, were these schools segregated?
No. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, they were segregated.
Racially segregated.
Racially segregated. They were. And I won't forget that in the 5th grade, as a matter of fact, each class at some point in time had to do either a morning devotion or they had to do an afternoon play of some type. And I never forget, our 5th grade class had to do a morning devotion at one time during the school year. And I never forget that my teacher selected me to sing Go Down Moses. I won't forget that. And so we not only had religious instruction from the home, but we had religious instruction in the school as well.
Were there any children who were not Christian in the school?
I wouldn't have been able to tell that, I don't think, because the curriculum at the school involved every child's participation in what lesson plans were, taught that day, and so no one was excluded.
Wow. And was your church as well, was your church mainly black people?
Absolutely. It was all black.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were separate white churches?
Absolutely. It was definitely separate white churches. As a matter of fact, at that particular time, even the areas in which we lived were racially divided and separated. So I seldom got a chance to even see where a white church was located. Durham was a big enough city. It stretched for many miles that on the African American side where I grew up, it stretched for many miles, and because of that, my entire environment was really associated with African Americans and the black community.
And were your teachers all African American?
All my teachers were African American.
Wow.
Until, this is the truth, God forgive me if I'm wrong, but when I got to the 11th grade, my physics teacher, now, unless he was a real light-skinned African American, I believe that he was Caucasian, because this was during the time when integration was just beginning to take place, and there was this whole idea of beginning to have African American students attend predominantly Caucasian schools. And this particular instructor came to our school as a science teacher, and I am almost certain that he was Caucasian. But of course, it was my first experience with having a Caucasian, instructor. But let me tell you, he certainly made me enjoy physics.
Wow. That's good. Somebody could enjoy physics. Wow. Well, as a child, were there any, I know you mentioned your mom, but were there any other important figures, people, and these could even be, historical figures, that influenced you religiously?
Let me see. Well, let me say that not a historical figure, but certainly a strong family figure was my daddy. Because my dad worked as the chef cook at North Carolina Central University. Back then it was called North Carolina College. And he was the chef cook there, but he also was the main cook at the church where he attended. And I didn't attend his church until I got much older because it was on another side of town. And of course, being small, I couldn't travel, that distance. And since he had to leave early to prepare the church dinners, most Sundays, he would, leave out early. And so I didn't have an opportunity to go with him or to sit that long. But he was a major influence, too, as a father, a man in my life who was God conscious, who stopped out of his busy week to be involved in the church. He was an usher too, to be involved in the church. Now, when I was young, I cannot remember anybody famous having an influence in my life. I cannot remember that young.
Okay.
a major influence, you know.
So how would you, if someone asked you what would you have said was your religion? How would you have identified yourself when you were little?
Oh, I definitely identify myself as Christian.
As a Christian.
Absolutely.
And do you remember what your first experience was with someone of a different faith?
Let me see. Someone of different faith. Now, North Carolina, Durham. Where I lived in Durham, it was pretty much predominantly Christian.
Okay.
And since I traveled primarily in an African American circle because of the segregation, I don't even remember running across anyone of another faith. Not even all the way through high school.
Wow. Okay. Till later on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a child, did you ever question, like up until adolescence? Did you ever question your religion
Until
or
adolescence?
or your religion or your faith?
Before adolescence, you said.
I'm sorry. Yeah, before adolescence.
Okay. Now, no. Before adolescence, there were no questions. I just simply followed the dictates of the good principles. Do unto others what you would like done unto yourself. You know, love your neighbors, you would love yourself, and all of the beautiful 10 Commandments that I grew up with. That was my life as a young person.
There doesn't sound like there was there any emphasis on punishment or hell?
Oh, well, now you mean in terms of
preaching?
No, I didn't. Let me see. When I think about it, let me see. Let me see. It seems I didn't really. I can't remember too much hearing this come from the church, but I picked up in. I think in my social environment, that if you did wrong, God would punish you. If you did right, of course, you were blessed for doing right. And so that was a strong influence that made me not want to do wrong.
Okay.
And it made me have a fear of God in a different kind of way. I didn't want to do anything that would bring his punishment on me. And that played an important part of how I perceived God later in my life when I became paralyzed.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's move. Remember that.
Okay.
I want to hear
Okay.
about that. Okay. Let's move into your adolescence.
Years.
And tell me.
Oh my gosh! Let me tell you about my adolescent years.
Oh, that sounds good.
Wow. Adolescent years. I'm growing up and I'm having my own thoughts about life in the world in which I live. And I'm seeing that there's something wrong with this continuous separation of the races. That there's no one race better than the other. That's in my mind. I'm growing up with hearing the voice of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, as he spoke about racial equality and about justice and freedom. So I grew up in that era. As a matter of fact, when I was in the 10th grade, I let me put this in a reference. Before I got to 10th grade, I was about 14 years old when I was sitting in church, and I kept seeing the often hung murals of Christ Jesus with the lambs around him. He's the shepherd, the great shepherd. And as I kept looking, and at this mural of Christ Jesus, who we were told is God because of the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. and all that God is to represent in terms of being fair and just and he's created all human beings in my adolescent understanding. And then I'm hearing the message of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King speak about the injustices in the society, and I'm living it because of the segregation that I've was raised in. I was raised up in, and so when I'm going to church now, I'm seeing this God differently, and I'm saying to myself, and even asked my mother, I said, why would God be the God that he is, and he allows a race of people to be so badly mistreated? And my mother said, shh. She said, you shouldn't talk like that. And but I wanted to know. And at that time, it stayed in my mind, it never left my mind, that there's something wrong with the way this doctrine is being taught. But of course, I was young, and you don't question authority, you don't question the preacher about these kind of happenings and occurrences that you see. So at 14, I just remained quiet. But it was in my mind that there's something wrong with this. How can we live in a world with all this kind of injustice being done to one people, but yet you say there is a God who created us all alike? Something's wrong with it. And it was as if I could never get the answer, but it never left my mind. But I continued to go to church. As a matter of fact, as an adolescent, I sang in the church. Let me make this transition. When I got older, I no longer went to my mother's Baptist church.
Oh, okay.
As I was older, and I was able to travel around and out and about, so I joined my father's church, the Methodist Church, AME Zion, St. Mark's AME Zion Methodist Church. So I joined the Methodist Church, and I sang in a youth choir and was active in the activities and programs there at the church. And now in the 10th grade, I continued to hear the teachings and the messages and addresses of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. So I'll never forget that he made a personal appearance at North Carolina College, it was called at the time. And I'll never forget, my mother didn't want me to leave the house, and I slipped out the house to go to the college to hear the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And I'll never forget that his speech that he gave was called, "We Are Sleeping Through a Revolution." I will never forget that. And I wanted so badly to join in the efforts of picketing and demonstrating and protesting and all, but my mother wouldn't let me go. She wouldn't let me join. But it was in my heart and my soul as a young person that there's something right about the message that he's teaching. And there's something that needs to be taught in the church.
Wow.
With regard to equality for all people. And I'm not hearing that. But I'm hearing it from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. So that was a really growing experience for me, because as I said, when I was 14, I was listening to my inner voice that was saying, all people are equal. Now, where do I find this message being taught somewhere else? And it was through the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King that I heard a message that was even more acceptable than the message I was being taught in the church. But I still remained a person devoted to going to church and being involved in my religious education. So that is the beginning of something new for me, but a new development, a new way of thinking, a new way of seeing things. My mother got ill when I was in the 11th grade, and as a matter of fact, she passed away when I was in my junior year. And at that time, I moved to Baltimore because my father worked swinging shift at the college, and my brother and sister who I had grown up with had now married and left home too. And so I was there with my mom and dad. And so after my mom died, I was just there with my dad. And again, because he worked swing shift, I could not be there alone by myself as a young teenage girl. So it was decided upon that I would move with my sister in Baltimore. So I left. School. I left my school, packed up, moved to Baltimore, enrolled in schools there, and with my being new to Baltimore, I did not really. I can't remember. It's almost. Let me see. I remember going to a church for a religious program because our next door neighbor played piano in the church, and his family had a religious gospel singing group.
And what church was this?
I cannot remember the name of it.
Do you remember what kind of church?
Yes, I remember. It was, again, an all African American church.
Baptist.
I don't remember the name. I don't know
Okay.
whether it was Baptist or not. But it was a church that my next door neighbor actually were members of, and they had a gospel choir, and we would go to their special programs that they had to hear them sing. But during that year that I lived with my sister after my mom died, I don't remember really attending a church, and I think that had a lot to do with the fact that the sister with whom I lived did not go to church. Now, the sister I'm talking about was 21 years older than me. She's in my mother's older set of children. So she was like a mother figure to me, age-wise and so forth. And she had a younger daughter that was more in my age group. And so because my sister and her husband did not attend church, I saw myself not attending church either at that particular time in my life.
And what was going on in your head? I mean, your church practices had changed. Your mom had just passed away. What was happening?
Well, there was quite a bit going on with me at that time. Wow, it's kind of hard to put it in words, but it was like a complete it was a sudden change. And it was a change actually, Susan, that you don't get an opportunity to think a lot about because you've got to go with the flow. Okay. I've got to move to Baltimore, be enrolled in another school, and it was all girls school. It was very different. And this school was, it had more Caucasian students in it than African Americans. Okay. And so that was totally different. An all-girls school, a school now where it's more Caucasian African Americans attending. And this is a big city, much bigger than Durham, the area I grew up in, where everybody knew each other. Neighbors were like family. A good, strong, supportive community. That was not what it was like. And then I was from the South with an accent, so that didn't make it any easier for me to be accepted in school. And so it was a real different experience for me. Now, I had been going to Baltimore ever since I was a little girl, so I knew my sister's neighbors, and they knew us coming up to Baltimore to visit over the summer. So the neighborhood was okay in terms of moving and staying, but the school experience was very different, and I didn't really like it. And as a matter of fact, I was anxious at the end of the school year to go back home so that I could graduate with the students I grew up with from first grade, now to our senior year. And I only went home once during that transition that I made when I moved away from home. I think I went home during the Easter break, and it was lonesome for me. it seems as though because I had moved away from my friends, um, that it was difficult for me to find my friends, and to get in touch and to continue to the establishment of my relationship that I had with my friends before I moved away.
Mm-hmm.
And it was senior year.
Mm.
So everyone was preparing to enter colleges, apply for colleges and things of that nature. And it was different.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a different, kind of experience. Well, that was the latter part of the junior year, entering into the senior year. So everyone was preparing, to go to school and so forth and so on. And I didn't have a long time to spend there to make those connections back with my classmates.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was different. It was a very different experience for me. And let me see. Oh, so at the end of the summer, after the school term was over, I asked my sister, could I go back home to stay?
Mm-hmm.
There was the niece that I mentioned earlier that I grew up in a household with, had married, had a little daughter, and she had gone through a divorce, so she had moved back into our father's house.
Mm-hmm.
So that being the case, there was somebody at home, would be at home, and it would be okay for me to move back, home. So that was wonderful for me because I was ready to leave Baltimore. It was, it was
Yeah.
okay, but it wasn't home for me, and I was ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
But I value the experience that I had because I did come into contact with more people from a different race, different class, of people, young girls, and I'm pretty sure just being in the classes and with our recess activities, I began to slowly get to know others, and they got to know me, and that was a different experience because I had not really had any contact or relationship, with Caucasians, with people really outside of my own,
Right.
ethnic group. So it was a very different experience as far as that was concerned. So basically, now, okay, speaking of the religious influence in my life, once again, and keep it in with the adolescent years and the role that religion played in my life. A major change came for me when I had my spinal cord injury, when I became paralyzed.
Okay.
Talk about that now.
How old were you when that happened?
I was 17 years old.
Yeah, let's move it. Yeah, let's start 17 and then we'll start getting into young
Okay.
adulthood. You're
Okay.
doing great.
All right. I was 17 years old. I was in my 4th day of my senior year.
And you were back in Durham.
I was back in Durham.
Okay.
Hip hip hooray. And it was when I first got home, of course, the first thing that is used. Well, when I got home, the word spread like wildfire that I was back home. I had in my school, I was pretty popular. I got along with people. People got along with me, and I was a very friendly, outgoing person. I did hold some had held some positions, in school. Like in my 10th grade year, I had been school secretary, the class secretary. And I had had a 4-year membership on the Student Government Association, the yearbook club, and the various other groups, student committees that I was a part of, and I was a pretty outgoing person. Um, so I come home now looking forward to graduating with my class, and then the fourth day of my senior year, I start feeling this numb and prickly. Let me back up. Let me back up. Um, it was customary that at the beginning of the school year, someone was going to give a back to school party. That's where it starts. So one of my friends had sponsored a back to school party, and she was actually a young girl that I grew up in elementary school with. She used to live on the next street to me, from me, and my older sister, with whom I had resided in Baltimore, and my schoolmates' mother all grew up together. We all knew each other. So this particular back to school party was being given at one of my friends' house. The young lady, her name is Livonia Tabor, that I grew up with. And there were two girls who lived across the street from me, whose mother had died in our sophomore year, and we were in classes together, so we really had bonded, out of a common experience. We both had lived in the projects in Durham, North Carolina, and then in the later years we had moved to another neighborhood that was pretty more like a middle class neighborhood, and a lot of us who had lived in the project had moved in this particular neighborhood, and so we still knew each other from our early, childhood life, Anyway, these two girls who had lost their mother and I had formed a tight bond, and we were going to go to the party together. So these girls drove. Their mother, since their mother had passed away, they had grown into having to take on a lot of responsibility, living at home with their dad and being teenage girls. So I was going to go to the party with them. They were coming back at 12 o'clock, and my sister told me, well, you're going to have to come back at 11. And I said to her, well, I'm not going to be able to come back at 11 because I'm riding with Carolyn and Deborah, and I'll have to come back at the same time they're coming back because the party was out in the county. There was no public transportation to get back and forth. So my sister kept insisting that I come back at 11. I got upset with her, and I told her in a very, angry voice that, well, I'm just not going to go. I just won't go, And she took it, the way I responded, she took it as disrespect. And then she pushed me. When she pushed me, I fell. And that's when I had no idea that I injured my spinal cord. She went back to Baltimore because she had only come down to Durham to bring me back, to get me back enrolled in school and so forth and so on. And she was going to go back to Baltimore, which all occurred. So in the fourth, she had left by the time school opened 2 weeks later, when I began to experience these prickly pin sensations, the numbness, and the uncoordination of where I was stepping, what foot I was moving on, and what leg I was moving. She had left to go back to Baltimore, and I didn't get to the party, and I started started school. The first day school session began, and 4 days after that is when I started having these different feelings in my lower extremities, in both my legs. Our first football game was going to be at the end of the first week of school, and I was preparing to go, but I couldn't go because these sensations I was having escalated, and so I went to Duke Hospital to see what was going on, and the doctors couldn't determine what was going on. As a matter of fact, they said that maybe I was stressing over my mother passing away, and maybe that was creating a problem for me, so they sent me home with some lithium. And so I went home and went to sleep When I woke up the next morning, I was paralyzed from neck down. I didn't know it, and I was I had awakened to go to church to sing in a choir that particular Sunday. And when I woke up, I asked my sister what time it was, and she said it's 2:00. And I said 2:00 because I've never known to sleep that long. I get up very early. I've always done that since a child, and so I tried to move and I couldn't move, and I told her I couldn't move, and of course she came running in the bedroom to see what was happening, and I couldn't move anything, and that began a whole nother religious experience and transition for me, because I thought I was being punished. I wanted to figure out, why was God punishing me? What had I done to earn being paralyzed in my senior year? And after all, my mother had died, and what was going on? Was I being cursed? Was there something that I did wrong that brought this on me? And I thought, well, no, I have not done anything different than any teenager would do, so why am I being punished? I couldn't figure that out, because that punishment is what you heard about. If you did wrong, you were going to be punished. That was part of what you were taught in the church. So I couldn't figure out what I had done wrong. But the one thing that really was a comfort to me during this period of this making an adjustment to being paralyzed was the stories in the Bible that I read about Job.
Oh, okay.
And how Job handled his physical illnesses with patience. And so that became just a rock that I held on to, to give me some kind of understanding of what's happening to me. I didn't fully understand still, but all I knew was that I had to bear with patience what is happening to me, and to strive to do everything I can with regard to the surgeries and rehabilitation, and pray to get well, pray to walk, and all of that, as part of my spiritual and emotional healing. But then it occurred to me young that, okay, somewhere in those early months of making this adjustment to being paralyzed and not knowing if I would ever walk again, if God was going to heal me, I accepted this, grew and accepted this understanding that it was not so much what I had lost that was important, and I shouldn't focus so much on what I lost, but I should really focus on, be thankful for what I had left. And I knew that my body might have been paralyzed, but I still had a good mind. That was so important to me. And so when I could, those early days, I couldn't, of course, I was paralyzed and couldn't hold up a book and things of that nature. But I prayed often. People from the church and my schoolmates came to see me regularly. I had a room full of cards and plants and flowers and money that people, had sent, and regular visitors. And I prayed as much as I knew how to pray. I prayed to just have some kind of understanding what was going on with me. I could understand why. I was being punished or paralyzed at this stage of my life. And especially in my senior year, I was looking forward to going to the prom, graduating, getting into college, the typical things that, adolescents would look forward to. So this was quite a blow to me. And so, oh boy. Oh, this is when I first came in contact, real contact on a daily basis with people. They're Christians, but they're another denomination.
Okay.
Now, my family was poor, so we could not afford to have a private duty nurse when I was discharged from the hospital. As I stayed there for 3 months, two major surgeries on my spinal cord. And so we could not afford to have a private duty nurse, so the hospital made contact with a Catholic order of nuns who were nurses, and they did charity nursing.
Was this in Durham?
This was in Durham.
Okay.
And they were called the Little Sisters of the Assumption. I'll never forget. And they came in every day in my home in a predominantly black neighborhood and gave me nursing care from December to June. And that's when, and they were all Caucasians. So that's when I had my first, I would say, real life experience with someone being in my home on a regular basis. But also, I don't want to overlook also that, and of another religious denomination. But while I was in the hospital, I was assigned an itinerant teacher. And the itinerant teacher was the wife of one of my doctors. And she was Caucasian. And so she would come to the hospital to give me the rest of my instructions toward earning the credits that I need to still be able to graduate. So when I was discharged from the hospital, she came to my home too. On given days of the week to continue with my instruction. This was the first time I had had any contact on an everyday basis with people of a different color, a different religious denomination, and there was one Catholic sister who I didn't really get along with. I said we both had some problems with each other, and it might have been along the line of race. But what I learned out of that, Susan. Okay, let me go here. In June, they left Durham. They took their order back to New York. They were from New York, and they went back to New York. Well, that was a transition time for me because at Duke had made an evaluation that I needed to be in a residential rehab center, and that I needed to be near family. So I went back to Baltimore. And on a train, and moved it back in with my sister again, and the order went, the nursing order went back to Baltimore, and then I was admitted into Montebello Rehab Center, Montebello Rehab Hospital was called, and when the nursing order finally moved all their belongings, en route back to New York, they stopped at the center to see me. I'll never forget them. The mother of the order and some of the sisters, and to this day, I'm writing my book right now, as a matter of fact, about what I'm sharing with you. I'll never forget that it taught me in a profound way that I'm humble and grateful and very thankful to God that He taught me that you don't have negative concepts about people who give you help, and that helping hand may be any color God wants it to be. And that really was a serious growing experience for me, particularly coming out of a segregation, a segregation, background. And I'm so grateful the lessons it taught me about one humanity, that we're all, human beings, and all these other physical features and things like that is just a part of how God created, His world. So I'm just humble that was a great lesson for me, in my life. That there are people who loved and cared enough for me to come to my home in my neighborhood and still render service to me and help me. That was a serious growth experience for me being a teenager. I was then 18. I had turned 18 because I had turned 18 when I was in the hospital. Because I was admitted in September, then November I turned 18. Another thing was the lesson for forgiveness that I learned, that God preaches, that I learned in the hospital, because at first I did not like my sister at all, because I attributed my being paralyzed to her knocking me down, pushing me down. And so I remember she came down for my 18th birthday to bring me gifts and to visit with me from Baltimore. And I really wrestled with whether or not I was going to be able to deal with her, being in her presence. But God helped me to get through it. And I realized she had no idea that the fall that I had from the push that I received from her had anything to do with my being paralyzed. And see, my sister believed in roots and voodoo kind of stuff, that somebody put a spell on me and that's how I got paralyzed. Well, thank God, I've never been inclined that way. And so that wasn't my thinking. I was thinking that maybe she was saying that to escape responsibility for pushing me, but it's as if it never dawned on her that that's where it came from. And in fact, she probably didn't think about it. But, that this had occurred from the push that she had given me. But again, relying on faith in God and on the principle of forgiveness, in time, it helped me to get over, feeling bad or feeling the pain and hurt from knowing that the initial push that she gave me that caused me to fall is what caused trauma to my spinal cord. So once again, I had to, rely on the principles that I learned of forgiving and not hate. That same principle of being grateful and not hating, because there's a people who perhaps that is responsible for, maybe not directly responsible, they're people responsible for your enslavement, for you being enslaved.
Right.
And that you've got to receive help from someone who you have grown to be leery of because of that experience. But here they are now providing treatment for you. That's quite some growing to do. Wow. But I thank God that He blessed me to grow, and that He blessed me to grow as an adolescent in that kind of understanding, because I was young.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that I grew out of that young, so that it wouldn't to grow up to have any kind of hatred. I'm glad that would not have been rooted in me. And that when I was young, I had an opportunity to grow out of any ill feelings toward people for whatever, whatever I may have given myself a reason,
Well, let's move into that. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that.
You're more than welcome.
Amazing story. Let's kind of move into your young adulthood,
young
your religious
adulthood
journey.
Oh, let me tell you, this is amazing. Young adulthood and my religious journey. Let me see. Well, here's what happened. Young adulthood. I was discharged from the hospital the rehab center. After being there two years and about 3 months, I was discharged to a foster home. Couldn't go to my family's home because in Baltimore, everything is row house, upstairs, downstairs. It's not nowhere near the ideal place for a person with a disability to be able to get around independently, as I had been taught in the rehab center. So that was the reason I had to move away from my family into another part of Baltimore, into a foster home, a family who took me in because they lived in a level, home. When I went to the foster home, I do not remember going, as far as my religious upbringing is concerned. I could not remember that family. Let me see. I cannot remember the family being. They were a kind family, but I don't remember them really going to church. And because I was in their home, I didn't go to church either. And but I only stayed in the foster home for a year before my sister had moved to another house that had more space for me, and so I moved back in with my sister. Now, let me see, from that vantage point, I began to, even when I was in the rehab center, they have different PAP preachers and chaplains who come out and provide Sunday services and services for holidays. Now, I don't want to leave that out because we did continues to have religious activities, while at the rehab center.
Yeah.
So when I got out of the rehab center, I looked for a place. I was discharged after I left the foster home. I started going to the Seventh-day Adventist. And I went to the Seventh-day Adventist because earlier, one of my neighbors who lived across the street would come over very frequently and play albums by Malcolm X. So I would listen to the Malcolm X messages on his big 78, 38 record player, right? 38 record player. And so I wanted to pursue what I was learning from listening to his tape. And the best thing I learned was, I know about color, solidarity, and all that, but I didn't want to eat pork anymore. Can you believe it? So that's why I joined the Seventh-day Adventists, because I knew they were the only group that I knew that didn't eat pork. But when I started going to the church, I felt alienated. There were so many steps, and they got the pews in the church. So I had to sit in the back, and it was really no space that was accessible. And then then I had to always wait around for somebody to help me up the steps to get in the church, and down the steps, and service was over. I felt alienated. I didn't feel like I was a part of the congregation. So I stopped going there. So it was also cross town in another community as well, area Baltimore. So then I said, so I started attending a few churches that was around in my neighborhood, but they had steps, were not accessible. I didn't feel a part of the community. And I wasn't satisfied that the Christian church kept eating pork. This is just something that was going on with me. So I thought, well, this is kind of rough, and then I kept seeing also, I saw African American people getting away from God. I didn't see the same religious sincerity that I did when I was growing up as a young girl, as a young child, as an adolescent. And this kind of newfound awareness that came with my disability, with now I've met other people outside of my religion, outside of my race, And it was the way the church was teaching, it was not bringing me satisfaction. So then I later, and at all this time, I'm going to school.
Okay.
During all this time, I'm going to school. So, in my sophomore year, in my Black literature class, we are required to read the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Okay.
And I read about Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I've never seen a Muslim. And I have never even heard the word Muslim. I'm trying to figure out, well, who are these people? But what I'm reading, I like, because they want to obey God. They don't want to live a loose life, and a life that's not honorable and dignified like our ancestors, had taught us. And like they believed in the God that freed them from slavery, and that they held to a strict moral standards. I don't see black people doing that anymore. They're putting their thing in black power and the dollar and all of that. That is something one-sided and wrong about that I don't really want to get involved in. So now I'm looking at the Nation of Islam because of the morals, but because it has a do for self philosophy, and that said, don't depend on the white man for everything that you need. Do for yourself. Mm-hmm. So these two philosophy had great appeal to me. The moral was the strongest, and the doing for self for African Americans' economic solidarity was very appealing to me. So I was one day I was at the shopping center getting my grocery. I called a cab to take me home, and the cab driver was a Caucasian man. He refused to take me because he said he was not going to mess up his cab with my wheelchair. And so there was a brother who was an African American male who was listening, obviously, to this conversation between me and the cab driver. The cab driver left, and so the guy approached me and he said, "Sister, do you need a ride home?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Well, I'll take you home. Where do you live?" I said, "I just live right around the corner. It's less than 5 minutes away." So he said, "Well, I'll take you home." So he was very kind. I could tell you when somebody was going to beat me up or rob me or anything like that, So anyway, he took me home, helped me with my groceries, my wheelchair in the house. And so I offered to pay him. He refused to accept the pay. So he said, "Well, sister, I have tickets that I'm selling for a Muslim program." Well, that was what I had read in my literature book about the word Muslim. And this first time I'm actually hearing somebody use that word. So I bought I was leery though, but I bought the tickets because that was my way of paying him. Mm-hmm. I had no intention of going to the program. Mm-hmm. I was still leery, even though I liked what I read in Malcolm X. But the day when the program came, I couldn't find anything to do. Homework was done, housework was done, the whole 9 yards. But by this time, I've moved into my own apartment. Wow. And wasn't accessible, but I had moved there because I couldn't stay with my sister. We had to have some separate quarters. So I went to the program. Mm-hmm. And what I heard was so appealing that the very next day I went to the temple. That's what it was called under the Nation of Islam, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So I went to the temple, and when they asked if anybody wanted to join up, I joined up.
Just like that?
Just like that. And
what year was this?
This was 1972. Okay. And I am a junior in college. I joined up and
what college did you go to?
Well, first I went to Community College of Baltimore. Mm-hmm. That was to get my 8A degree, and then I transferred to Antioch College. It was independent study. Didn't really care for that type of study, and I'm a classroom person. Mm-hmm. So I then transferred to Morgan State University, all African American, predominantly African American in Baltimore. So I went to Morgan. That's where I'm attending when I'm attending this program, and I accept the Nation of Islam. I join up in the Nation of Islam. And, the Nation of Islam, we taught the white man is the devil, and that he's responsible for everything bad that has happened, to us as a people. So I didn't, that always was a conflict for me, because I said, well, how can they be the devil? And they was the ones that helped me get my surgery. And these are the people who came in my home and provided nursing care for me. And the lady who came to help me finish school was a white lady who was my teacher. It's something I can't quite accept that. But I do accept the experience of slavery, and that was a bad experience. And an unjust experience. I accept that, but I can't accept that every white person is the devil, because I've met some black folk that is big as devils too. So something's wrong with this picture. Because when I was at the rehab center, it was a black lady that knew I had fallen on the floor and told me, you'll just keep your ass there till we get you up off, till we finish making our rounds on the ward. And I had been treated badly by blacks too, So I said, this is something wrong with this. But in terms of the morals, and I said the economic solidarity, to want to have something for ourselves and not be welfare people for the rest of our lives, that attracted me. And the discipline attracted me. And I later became a school teacher there. So to educate African American children to live a moral and a life pursuing academic excellence. So that was all attractive to me, and I devoted my life to that. And I got married. I had children, 2 biological sons in a wheelchair. Marriage lasted for 10 years, divorced in the 11th year. And during that time, in 1975, the then leader of the Nation of Islam, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, passed away. And his son was selected as the new leader. That was the Imam Worthy Muhammad, who passed away about 2 years ago. It's going on now. And so, of course, when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad passed away and his son became the new leader, Imam Worthy Muhammad, well, we left and pulled away from the Nation of Islam concept of Islam and grew into the universally accepted Islam as is revealed in the Quran. So that's where my next religious experience began.
So those were 2 different, they were actually 2 different tenets, 2 different philosophies?
Well, yes, in a way, because in the Nation of Islam, they were taught that the black man was God, the white man was the devil, and that we should do for, let me see, what, now the doing for self, there was no problem. The moral excellence, the moral discipline, that was no problem. But we would not admit any Caucasians into our,
so segregated.
Right, it was very segregated. And that was it. And that there was this gentleman who had brought the concept of al-Islam that was being practiced under the Nation of Islam. The gentleman who had brought that concept, he was looked at as God, who had brought a new philosophy, a new way of thinking, to African American people for their salvation, in essence. And his name was W.F. Farad. I never saw him or anything like that, but he was someone who we were taught about.
Right.
And we were taught a lot of things, Susan, like the kind of hidden language and suggestive language that relegates African American people to a very low status as human beings. Like that, we were being called black people. They were saying that, look at the black cat, how the black cat is looked at as a cat that people don't let him cross your path because he'll bring you bad luck.
Yeah.
a devil food cake was black, but an angel food cake was white. You know, and all of those other connotations that went with racially suggestive language, even right in the culture and the society that we lived in. So those were some of the teachings, and how the black man is God, and we learned a lot of lessons and things of that nature related to that. But when Imam Wardi Muhammad was accepted as the leader in '75 after his father passed away, he taught us the message, the language, and the true religion of al-Islam that is universally accepted by 1.6 billion people on the face of the earth, and brought us out of those racist.
So, but
teachings.
you stayed with the same kind of congregation or group, or did you?
Well, let me tell you, what happened is that people began to make their choice about which way they were going to go.
Okay.
So there was a group who did not accept that, wanted to hold on to the kind of still segregationist teachings of the Nation of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
They separated. They went with Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Okay.
Our group that accepted the universality of al-Islam went with Imam Wardi Muhammad, so it was a separation from within.
Okay.
And it's still separated that way. Even though the members in the Nation of Islam, I understand they're growing more into the universality of al-Islam, they've not really fully accepted, a universal teaching. They still follow more of a segregationist teaching, nationalistic type of teaching of al-Islam. But I'm grateful that, and feel blessed that, I was growing through my own life experiences of working of God sending different people in my life, to see that there was something that was not quite right about it. I even tell my husband, I said, well, when I heard those teachings about the black man being God and so forth and so on, I said I didn't fully accept it, because that was not the God that I knew about when I grew up.
Yeah.
Even though there might have been segregation when I grew up, I knew that there was a just God who made all human beings. And that was the God that I wanted to believe in and serve, while I did accept the self independent philosophy of the Nation of Islam, at the time when I joined. But I was so grateful to have, it was easy for me to accept the universality of al-Islam, and to go in that direction. And so, of course, I've been a Muslim, since '72. I had a brief period in the Nation of Islam, because for me that period lasted from '72 to '75, just 3 years. And so from '75, I've been following the universally accepted al-Islam. It's the faith of al-Islam. So that has impacted my life tremendously. I mean, it's pervades my entire life now, my adult life. Let me see. I was in 1975, I was what, 36? 75? Oh, Lord, let me get my mathematics together. 26. I was 26, that's right. I was 26, and so for the remainder of the years, I'm 62 now, and so that's what, 26 and 36. No, yeah, 26 and 36. So for 36 years, I've been following the universally accepted teachings of al-Islam.
If you could tell me about, can you tell me about your Hajj?
Oh, yes.
You alluded to it, yeah.
Yes. Well, back in '77, I think that is. I think that's the first group from the new group under Imam Wardi Muhammad That's the first year, I believe, that the new group who went into Universal Accept Al-Islam under Imam Wardi Muhammad's lead, that's the first year they've made Hajj. So they're a big crowd of Muslims, newly converted to the real Al-Islam, who made that Hajj. Of course, I didn't get a chance to go, but each time members from a community make Hajj, they always come back and talk about their Hajj experiences. So, oh boy, I was inspired every year someone made Hajj to want to go. And of course, I told you I got married. I remember in 1980, that's when my first child was born. I made my intentions. They always said, make your intentions. If you make your intentions, and Allah will aid you in your intentions in making the preparation that you need to make, to make Hajj. So I had my first child in 80. I made my intentions, okay. And then I had my second child in 83. Didn't get a chance to go, motherhood calling, So I'm real fervent, working in the school. I got divorced during this time from my children's father, and I moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I continued to work as a teacher in the school there. Not many people from the community in Winston-Salem made Hajj, but when I came to Atlanta, big congregation of Muslims, and many people making their Hajj, and man, I just was glued to their stories when they shared their Hajj experience. And once again, made my intentions and prayed to God that He would allow me one day to be able to make the journey. So in 92, I did. I was blessed to go. It was wonderful and shocking. Shocking because, oh my God, I'm thinking that, wow, I am in heaven. This is paradise for sure on earth. I get ready to go into the masjid there, Masjid al-Haram. And this Muslim, Arab Muslim, comes up to me and shoos me away like I'm a fly. And he jumps in front of me and blocks me from going into Masjid al-Haram. I thought, it's something wrong with him. Because I have just traveled all these 1,000 miles to come over here to make my Hajj. And he's going to block me from going into Masjid al-Haram. And I wanted to get ugly until I remembered the words of Allah, words of God in Quran, that says, let there be no wrangling in the Hajj. Let there be no wrangling
okay.
in the Hajj. And so that quieted my spirit. And I said, okay, if I can't get in here, I'll keep trying to go to different doors until I am let in. So we went to about 7 different doors before we finally found a friendly human being, Muslim, who let me in to perform my Hajj rites. And now it was, I saw people from all over the world. I mean, from nearly jet black to the lightest white you could get. All of humanity. I've always loved people since I took geography in the 4th grade. Always loved people. So I couldn't even stay inside the building at times that we should have been resting. I stayed outside on the sidewalk. I just wanted to see this parade of people from all over the world. I was mesmerized, and even though we couldn't speak each other's languages, and we had different cultural dress and things like that, it was just amazing to me to see all these people. And I think that year there was about 2.5 or 3 million people who made the Hajj, at that time. And to just see that was so incredible to me. I said, I know this is what God wants of us. He wants us to be one humanity. Now, we have our different cultures, our different language, our different colors. We have all of that. But there's one human nature, that God created in all of us. And it was just an eye-opening experience, and I had to depend on people from other uh, countries and other cultures to help me. That was another significant thing, because I couldn't circumambulate the Kaaba in my wheelchair. It was crowded. So there are African brothers who put you in a big basket and trot you around the Kaaba. So first I had to depend on them.
Wow.
Another set of African brothers who pushed me between Safa and Marwa, which are the places where the beautiful mother of Ishmael ran finding sustenance for her baby. And then I was feeling very faint one day in Masjid al-Haram because it was so crowded and so hot. When we attended there, it was 115 degrees. And I felt faint, and these two ladies, neither of whom spoke my language, didn't know me, the whole 9 yards from different countries, saw that I was having some difficulty. And each of them approached me to give me something that was going to help me. One lady gave me a salt egg, and another one gave me water. And she kept giving me water. We couldn't even speak each other's language. They just saw a human need. I said they saw the language of human need, and they came to my rescue and my aid. And that was so significant to me. But I also saw a cat that looked so undernourished, and this may sound crazy, but I saw a cat was so undernourished, and I had some tuna in my emergency bag that I kept with me in my chair. And I fed that cat. And God showed me that we are to care for the least of his creatures through that experience. Yeah. So when I came home, I became much more sensitive and aware of the respect for all life, even my plants. So when I would see my plants wither, I would make sure I give them water, because I said, oh my, that's a sign that they need water to keep them alive. So I became just acutely aware of the respect for all life, and to form relationships with all people. That we're all, one people, created by the one created. We may have different ways that we worship, serve him, and things of that nature, but we're all still, one human family who should have concern and love and care and promote the good for each other. And so that was a profound experience for me. But while I was there, I got a serious ulcer on my hip. So as soon as I got back to the United States, I had to go to Shepherd Spinal Center, where I was a patient there for 2 months because I had to get a skin graft for the area, the big pressure area that had formed on my hip while I was at Hodge, because I was there for a month. And so to just see people bowing down to the one God, making the same prayer, forming the same rituals, but also not just rituals, but living the principles. You see, you're going to always see people have differences in understanding. And we got a lot of growing to do still. When you go to Hodge and you see people like that man I first encountered who was trying to shoo me away. I was trying to figure out how was he shooing me away. Was it because I was a woman? Because I know there are some still issues to be dealt with as far as women are concerned in some of the Islamic countries. Was he shooing me away because I was black? Or was he shooing me away because I was disabled? Because all three of those seem to be areas of challenges for some people, So I didn't know what it was, but I know I was not going to be deterred from performing my rites after traveling that far. Because, we're only required to make Hajj once in a lifetime. And I didn't know if I was going to get back there again. So I wanted to make sure that, no one was going to stop me from performing my rites. So I had to be firm on more than one occasion when I was at Hajj, to make sure that I was respected, as a human being, So.
Wow. We're going to start. This has been really wonderful. We're going to just start wrapping it up. I've got just a couple questions
Sure.
left. Are there any traditions outside of your primary religion that you draw upon for prayer, holidays, rituals, things like that?
Let me see. Well, there are, well, some Muslims don't really celebrate birthdays,
Mm.
but because we say the moment of conception is known to God.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment that you come out your mother's womb, that's a whole nother,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother birth. So I do thank God for every day that I live to turn a year older.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I do have like a small social gathering with friends, with family and friends. And Mother's Day is not really the two holidays specific to Islam. Is Eid al-Fitr, which follows Ramadan, the month of fasting, and Eid al-Adha, which follows the pilgrimage, the Hajj. So those are the two religious days that are specifically Islamic related. But you know, we respect, and I certainly respect, and we've been taught to respect Mother's Day because of its significance. You know, Father's Day, Independence Day, July the 4th, because it's a day of a time of patriotism, and so forth. Thanksgiving, you know, I think most of us as Muslims, under Imam Muhammad's persuasion, we realize the significance of being thankful and appreciative and grateful in our lives. So many of us do celebrate those days, you know, as well. And they're usually at our mosque on New Year's. We gather like we used to do when in the African American community, together in church on New Year's.
Oh.
And pray the New Year's in. You know, rather than bullets, we pray for blessings. Instead of shooting the New Year, we pray it in. So we still hold to that tradition, and there is another tradition that we celebrate, but every community doesn't do it, but sometimes we do it, and that's called Juneteenth. And so Juneteenth is the time that we usually have a special, you know, some kind of special social activity, you know, around. So those are some of the, you know, other traditions, and we do, you know, respect the traditions and rituals of other faith communities. I mean, say for instance with Christmas, you know, we still go back and eat with our families and join in, because God teaches us to not break family ties. You know, now with me, I am just I am an advisory committee co-chair for the Interfaith Disability Network. So wow, this has given me a wonderful opportunity to continue to work with people of different faith communities. And as a matter of fact, next Monday, I'm going to the Jewish Film Festival so I can look at one of the movies that I've been invited to, you know, attend. And you know what, Susan, I feel so free. Al-Islam has freed me to love, respect, to work, to cooperate in mutual cooperation with other people who want to advance, you know, our world for good.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Al-Islam has made me really understand the globalization of the human family. And so whatever I can do as my part in that, that's what I'm trying to live into.
Right.
I'm trying to live into that.
Well, I think that's a great place, and you're right on time here. So
Okay.
that's really wonderful.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to put on the side that you want to clip into from?
Well, do you, just in regard to your religion, do you feel understood, misunderstood in Atlanta, like within your religion?
Oh, yeah, you
but
did
also,
ask that.
Yeah, but also your faith in the general Atlanta community. So those are kind of two questions.
Okay, I got you. In my faith community, I feel because we're talking locally in the Atlanta community. I feel I'm well known. I feel very, very respected, accepted. My talents and my gifts are appreciated because I'm doing, have developed, and I'm still working on money is a problem, but I'm developing, establishing, and developing the first really line of Quranic based inspirational greeting cards.
Oh.
There's none on the market. And I've been in touch with the American Greeting Card Association. They're none registered with them. Now, I'm a little slow because of financial, challenges in getting them out there. But I've been blessed to, because I told you I'm a poet, So I write poetry of different lengths and so forth and so on. But I'd ask God to help me to put the poetry in a medium where it could really be purchased and acceptable, and a marketable item. And I was blessed to come up with the idea of doing Islamic all occasion greeting cards. So that's what I'm working on now. So because of that, the word gets around that, let's go to Sister Betty's and get the greeting cards, so forth and so on. And I was a teacher in the school here, and and I'm pretty outspoken, Susan. So I'm not one of those quiet parishioners. I do speak out, and sometimes people are on different sides of how we see things, and that's okay with me because I know we all develop differently with regard to our understanding. But it's okay. But I feel like my views are appreciated, and I do feel I feel very much a part because I work with Interfaith Disability Network. We work with helping faith communities achieve inclusion and becoming barrier free and being hospitable, welcoming places, and accessible places for people with disabilities. So I've done that a lot in the Islamic community. And so people, know me from that work, in the community too. So I feel very warm and very accepted, and my views are respected.
And do you feel that the Muslim community is accepted in the
Atlanta community? Absolutely, in the Atlanta community. Maybe in some other places they might not be, but absolutely, the Islamic community has made a strong impact in the Atlanta community. First of all, the Islamic community have formed alliances with other faith communities. I know there's a Faith Alliance Ministry Association. I think they're called FAMA. And there's various other faith communities who form that group. So Al-Islam is greatly respected. There's a lot of people accepting the faith of Al-Islam, and in general, you can hear conversations from people that they've had some contact with the faith. There's a lot of people converting, to the religion, and you can meet people on the street and they give you the greetings, because they're familiar with the Muslim way of greeting of peace to everybody. And so it's really, the masjids have grown. I remember there were very few. There are now some 33 masjids throughout the Atlanta metro area. The last count. So it's the religion is growing, and people are respecting that way of life. But also because, see, in the Quran, God calls us, the Jewish people, Christian and Muslims, we are called people of the books, because each of us receive books of revelation, from God, from the Creator, and that brings about a brotherhood, among people of faith. So so we have been blessed to really enter into that family of people of faith, and people are accepting.
Wonderful.
People are accepting it. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. I just have a few little demographic questions.
You just come right on and ask all the questions you like.
What is your occupation?
I'm a housewife. I'm telling you, a homemaker.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't work outside of my home, but I work on my greeting cards and my writings,
Cool.
inside the home. But I don't make an income from it yet,
Okay.
not anything that will support
Right.
my living expenses. So,
Right.
but I'll continue to work on it.
And I know some of these are duplicate questions. But
No
we just
problem,
need
no
them.
problem.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Durham, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
When? On November the 26th, 1948. That makes me 62 years young.
And how do you describe your ethnicity?
The city?
Your ethnicity.
Well, how do I describe my ethnicity? I describe my ethnicity as African American.
Okay.
I guess I'll leave it there. African American.
And what is your educational background?
My educational background is that the highest degree I received was my master's in education administration when I was living in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins University. And I've, for the most part, have spent a number of years teaching in the Islamic community, operating homeschools, and then discovered this gift of writing that I'm doing now.
And your marital status?
I am married to
And
Ronnie Sadiq Amin.
And he is Muslim?
He's Muslim, yes,
Okay.
he is.
And how many children do you have?
I have 2 biological children, 2 sons, and 1 biological stepson.
Okay.
hmm
And your current religious affiliation?
My current religious affiliation is the religion of Al-Islam.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, I thank you. This is
was
wonderful.